My name is Lucille. I'm standing in a courtroom, the air thick with tension. The judge has just announced the verdict, and the room is in shock. Diane, my so-called stepmother, sits there in disbelief, her face pale as a ghost. Kyle and Madison, her biological children, are in various states of distress. It's the culmination of a long, fought battle, and I finally feel like I'm emerging from the shadow of a lifetime of mistreatment. Let me take you back to the beginning. When I was 6, my life changed forever. My parents, Henry and Grace, were kind-hearted artists. They spent their days creating beautiful paintings and sculptures, and they adored me more than anything. But one fateful day, a terrible car accident on Route 17 took them away from me. I was at a local art class trying to paint a landscape when I got the news. Suddenly, I was an orphan. My uncle, Robert, took me in. He was a hard, working accountant, always buried in numbers. His wife, Diane, was a social climber. She was more concerned with her image in our small town of Riverton than with the well-being of a grieving child. Their children, Kyle, who was 2 years older than me, and Madison, a year younger, had the run of the house. They had spacious bedrooms on the second floor, filled with toys and the latest gadgets. Meanwhile, I was given a tiny attic room with a slanted ceiling and a small, dirty window. Diane's cruelty was subtle but constant. At dinner, there were often only 3 plates set out. "Oh, Lucille, I always forget," she'd say with a fake smile. "You'll have to get your own." Family photos on the walls were a constant reminder of my outsider status. Kyle, Madison, Robert, and Diane were all there, smiling, while I was nowhere to be seen. When I was 9, I asked her about it. She looked at me as if I was being ridiculous. "Those are for the real family, Lucille," she said coldly. As I grew older, the disparity in treatment became even more evident. Kyle got a brand new motorcycle for his 16th birthday, and Madison got a fancy music lessons package. I, on the other hand, had to work part-time at the local bookstore to buy my own school supplies. When I asked Robert if there was any money set aside for my college, he mumbled something about talking to Diane. At dinner that night, Diane told me, "College isn't for everyone, Lucille. You can always work in a store." I knew then that I was on my own. But there was one bright spot in my life, my grandmother, Amelia. She was a retired librarian with a warm, kind heart. Every Saturday, she'd pick me up and take me to her cozy cottage by the lake. There, she'd teach me how to bake pies and tell me stories about my parents. "Your father had your artistic talent," she'd say, "and your mother had the most beautiful laugh." I held on to those words like precious jewels. Diane hated my time with Amelia. "She's old and fragile, Lucille. You're wearing her out," she'd say. But I didn't listen, not until I was 13. That year, Diane threatened to tell Amelia that I didn't want to visit anymore. I was scared, so I started asking for permission, and more often than not, it was denied. One day, just before my 18th birthday, Amelia pulled me aside. "Your parents loved you so much, Lucille. They left you a legacy," she said. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but I knew it was important. Fast forward to Amelia's 85th birthday. Diane had booked the fanciest restaurant in town for the celebration. When I arrived, dressed in a simple dress that I'd saved up for, Diane's eyes followed me around the room. She stood up during the meal and said, "Lucille, this table is for family. Why don't you sit at the bar?" Everyone laughed, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Then, the waiter came and placed a huge bill in front of me. It was for the entire dinner, all the guests, and it was a fortune. I took a deep breath and paid it with the money I'd saved from my part-time jobs. But just as I was about to leave, Amelia's voice rang out. "Just a moment, please." A man in a suit stood up. He introduced himself as Amelia's lawyer. He opened a briefcase and laid out a stack of papers. It turned out that my parents had set up a trust fund for me worth $800,000. Diane, as the custodian, had spent every cent on Kyle and Madison's luxuries, home renovations, and her own shopping sprees. The room was in an uproar. Diane tried to deny it, but the evidence was clear. Amelia then announced that she had revised her will, and I was now the sole beneficiary of her estate. Diane was furious. She launched a smear campaign against me on social media, calling me a gold digger and saying that I'd manipulated Amelia. But Amelia and her lawyer were prepared. They filed a counter claim for breach of fiduciary duty. 6 weeks later, in court, the judge ruled in my favor. Diane had to pay back the trust fund, plus interest and legal fees. After the court case, the town's perception of Diane changed. Her flower shop lost customers, Kyle lost his job in real estate, and Madison had to find a job at a local diner. Diane came to me one day, looking defeated. "I know I wasn't perfect, Lucille," she said, "but I took you in." I told her that while I was grateful for the roof over my head, I wouldn't let her take away my dignity or my rightful inheritance ever again. I used the money from the trust fund to set up a scholarship for orphaned and foster children in Riverton. It was a way to honor my parents' memory. Amelia is still with me, and every Saturday, I drive to her cottage without having to ask for anyone's permission. I've finally found my place, and I'm no longer the outsider in my own life.